The massive doors of the galactic research vessel Nexus Prime slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a corridor that stretched far beyond what human eyes could easily see. Commander Jake Morrison stepped forward first, his boots making quiet sounds against the polished metal floor. Behind him walked 3 other humans, each wearing the crisp blue uniforms of Earth's Space Command. They had traveled for 6 months to reach this moment, and now they were finally here. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan walked beside Communications Officer Lisa Parker, both women trying hard not to stare at the incredible technology surrounding them. The walls seemed to pulse with a gentle light, and strange symbols moved across transparent screens that floated in the air without any visible support. Medical Officer Ryan Brooks brought up the rear, carrying a small case filled with gifts from Earth that seemed almost primitive compared to what they were seeing. The Nexus Prime was home to the Galactic Federation, a collection of alien species that controlled most of the known galaxy. For the first time in human history, Earth had been invited to join their ranks. But this was only the beginning. The next 5 days would determine whether humanity deserved full membership or would be relegated to some lesser status among the stars. Jake had read every report about the Federation species during the long journey here. The Zephyrians were the most powerful, standing nearly 8 feet tall with bodies made of what looked like living crystal. They were warriors and had conquered dozens of worlds through sheer physical strength. The Kithara resembled giant insects, and were known for their advanced technology and hive-mind intelligence. The Luminari were beings of pure energy who rarely took physical form and were considered the wisest of all Federation members. As they walked deeper into the ship, Jake noticed other beings in the corridors. A group of Zephyrians moved past them, their crystalline bodies reflecting the corridor lights in brilliant patterns. None of them acknowledged the humans, though Jake could feel their eyes tracking the small delegation as they passed. The message was clear even without words. Humans were curiosities at best. They reached a large chamber where the welcoming ceremony would take place. The room was enormous, with a domed ceiling that showed the stars outside in perfect clarity. Hundreds of beings from different species filled the space, all of them much larger and more impressive than the 4 humans who had just entered. At the center of the room stood a raised platform where the Federation Council waited. Council leader Vexthara was a Zephyrian whose crystal body seemed to contain swirling galaxies of light. Even from a distance, her presence felt overwhelming. Beside her stood representatives from the other major species, each one radiating power and authority that made the humans feel very small. Jake led his team toward the platform, conscious that every eye in the room was watching them. He had been chosen for this mission because of his diplomatic skills and military background, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer scale of what they were facing. Earth's entire population was smaller than some of the single worlds controlled by Federation members. As they approached the platform, Vexthara raised one crystalline hand for attention. Her voice filled the chamber without any need for amplification, resonating through the crystal formations in her body. We gather today to welcome the newest applicants to our Federation. The species known as humans have requested membership. Based on their recent achievements in space travel and their claims of technological advancement. The way she said it made it sound like humanity's accomplishments were barely worth mentioning. Jake kept his expression neutral, but he could feel the subtle condescension in her words. Around the chamber, he noticed other beings whispering among themselves, and none of the expressions he could read looked particularly welcoming. The humans will undergo a standard evaluation period, Vexthara continued. During this time, they will demonstrate their capabilities and prove their worthiness to join our ranks. We expect all Federation members to observe the highest standards of strength, intelligence, and contribution to our collective security. Jake stepped forward when she gestured for him to speak. The platform automatically adjusted its height to bring him closer to her level, but he still felt dwarfed by her presence. Council Leader Vexthara, honored representatives of the Federation, we thank you for this opportunity. Humanity comes before you not claiming to be the strongest or the most advanced, but as a species ready to contribute our unique perspectives and abilities to the greater good of all civilized worlds. His words echoed in the vast chamber, but the response was lukewarm at best. A few polite nods from some species, but Jake noticed that many of the Zephyrians seemed almost amused by his speech. One of them, a massive warrior with battle scars etched into his crystal flesh, was actually smiling in a way that didn't look friendly at all. The ceremony continued with the presentation of gifts. Each human delegation member stepped forward. To offer something from Earth, Kate presented a collection of human art and music, trying to explain the emotional significance of pieces that probably seemed primitive to beings who could manipulate matter at the molecular level. Lisa offered examples of human literature and poetry, speaking passionately about the ideas and dreams contained in the works. Ryan's gift was, perhaps, the most practical samples of human medical knowledge and biological adaptation techniques. He explained how humans had learned to survive in almost every environment on their planet, from the deepest oceans to the highest mountains. But even as he spoke, Jake could see the skeptical expressions on many faces in the audience when it came time to present the ceremonial artifact that would symbolize Earth's place in the Federation. Disaster struck. The artifact was a beautiful crystal sculpture created by the Federation's artisans, meant to represent the unity of all member species. As Kate reached out to accept it, the ship's artificial gravity fluctuated slightly, a minor adjustment that would barely affect the stronger alien species. For Kate, however, the sudden change was enough to throw off her balance. The artifact slipped from her hands and would have shattered on the platform floor if Ryan hadn't lunged forward to catch it. The save was impressive by human standards, but to the watching aliens, it looked like proof of human clumsiness and weakness. Laughter rippled through sections of the audience, quiet but unmistakable. Jake saw Zephyrian warriors exchanging glances that clearly communicated their opinion of human physical capabilities. Even some of the more diplomatic species seemed to be reconsidering their initial assessments. Vextara's expression remained neutral, but Jake caught a flicker of something that might have been disappointment. "The humans will be shown to their quarters," she announced. "The evaluation period begins tomorrow. We trust that you will use this time to prepare yourselves for the challenges ahead." As they left the ceremony chamber, Jake could feel the weight of representing his entire species settling on his shoulders. The whispers and glances that followed them down the corridor were not encouraging. In one day they had gone from hopeful applicants to objects of pity and amusement. That night, as Jake sat in his assigned quarters looking out at the stars, he wondered if humanity had made a mistake in reaching for the stars. The galaxy was vast and full of beings who made humans look like children playing at being adults. But somewhere deep inside, he felt the same stubborn determination that had carried his species through ice ages, plagues and wars that had consumed entire continents. The evaluation would begin tomorrow, and Jake intended to show these aliens that humanity had more to offer than they realized. The second day aboard the Nexus Prime began with what Jake had hoped would be a peaceful morning briefing. He was wrong. The message came early, delivered by a floating communication device that materialized in their quarters with a soft chime. Commander Zarkith of the Zephyrian military wished to speak with the human delegation immediately. Jake had read about Zarkith during his preparation for this mission. The alien was a legendary warrior who had led successful campaigns against rebel forces in 3 different star systems. His crystal body bore the scars of countless battles, each mark representing a victory that had expanded Zephyrian influence across the galaxy. He was not someone who requested meetings lightly. The human team gathered in the corridor outside their quarters, each one trying to hide their nervousness. Kate adjusted her uniform for the 3rd time, while Lisa checked her translation device, even though the Federation's universal communication system made such devices unnecessary. Ryan carried his medical kit out of habit, though he doubted it would be needed for a simple meeting. They found Zarkith waiting in one of the ship's training facilities, a massive space filled with equipment that looked both alien and intimidating. The Zephyrian commander stood nearly 9 feet tall, his crystal body catching and reflecting the room's lights in patterns that seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. When he turned to face them, Jake could see battle damage etched into the left side of his face, giving him an even more formidable appearance. "Humans," Zarka said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I have studied your species since your arrival. Your physical specifications are most interesting. I believe there may have been some error in the Federation's evaluation of your capabilities." Jake felt a momentary surge of hope. Perhaps the Zephyrian warrior had seen something in humanity that others had missed. "We appreciate your interest, Commander Zarketh. How can we assist you?" The alien's response was not what Jake expected. "I wish to conduct proper strength assessments. The ceremony yesterday was merely diplomatic formality. True evaluation requires practical demonstration. You will participate in standard Zephyrian military exercises so that we may accurately measure your species' potential." The words sent a chill through the human delegation. Standard Zephyrian military exercises were designed for beings whose bodies were composed of living crystal and who possessed strength that could crush stone with their bare hands. For humans, such exercises might prove impossible or even dangerous, but refusing was not an option. Jake could see other alien delegates gathering at the edges of the training facility, clearly expecting some kind of demonstration. Word of this challenge had spread quickly through the ship, and now they had an audience that included representatives from every major Federation species. "We accept your challenge, Commander," Jake said, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "What would you like us to demonstrate first?" Zarketh gestured toward a series of crystalline weights arranged in ascending order of size. The smallest was roughly the size of a human head, while the largest resembled a small boulder. Strength assessment begins with basic lifting capacity. Each weight represents standard training levels for Zephyrian youth of different ages. The smallest is used by our children who have just begun physical development. Jake approached the smallest weight with growing concern. If this was meant for Zephyrian children, it might still be beyond human capability. He wrapped his hands around the crystal formation and lifted. The weight came up, but the strain was immediately apparent. What should have been an easy warm-up exercise for any Zephyrian felt like a significant challenge for Jake. Around the training facility, alien observers exchanged glances. Jake could hear quiet discussions in languages his translation device couldn't fully interpret, but the tone was clear enough. They were not impressed. Kate stepped forward to attempt the next weight level, one that Zarketh indicated was standard for adolescent Zephyrians. She managed to lift it off the ground, but her arms shook with the effort and she had to set it down after only a few seconds. The watching aliens made no effort to hide their amazement at what they clearly saw as a pathetic display of weakness. Lisa tried the same weight and couldn't lift it at all. Ryan managed to get it a few inches off the ground before his grip failed entirely. Meanwhile, Zarketh demonstrated proper technique by lifting the largest weight with one hand, holding it steady for several minutes while explaining the training principles that governed Zephyrian physical development. "Interesting," the alien commander said as he set down the massive crystal with casual ease. "Your species appears to operate at approximately 10% of minimum Zephyrian capability. This presents significant tactical limitations for any military cooperation." The second test involved endurance running on a track that circled the training facility. Zarketh explained that this was a standard patrol exercise designed to simulate the movement speeds required for effective battlefield reconnaissance. He set a pace that looked reasonable from a human perspective, but within minutes it became clear that what seemed reasonable to a Zephyrian was potentially deadly to a human. Jake managed to keep up for the first few laps, his military training serving him well, but as the minutes passed, his breathing became labored and his legs began to feel like lead weights. Kate and Ryan fell behind early while Lisa struggled to maintain even a walking pace on the track. The alien observers watched, with expressions that ranged from pity to outright amusement. A group of Kithara delegates clicked their mandibles together in what Jake recognized as their equivalent of laughter. Several luminary energy beings pulsed with colors that their translation devices indicated represented disappointment, the endurance, Test reached its breaking point when Lisa collapsed during the 8th lap. She went down hard, her legs simply giving out from exhaustion. Ryan immediately broke from the exercise to tend to her, checking her pulse and breathing while Jake and Kate stopped their own attempts to help their teammate. Zarkith observed the scene with what might have been professional interest. Medical intervention becomes necessary after minimal exertion. This confirms the preliminary assessment of human physical limitations. Your species lacks the basic stamina required for standard Federation military operations. As Ryan helped Lisa to her feet, Jake could see the defeat in his teammates' faces. They had known going into this that humans were physically weaker than most Federation species, but seeing the extent of that weakness demonstrated so publicly was crushing. The alien observers were already beginning to disperse, apparently having seen enough to form their conclusions about human capabilities. That evening, the human delegation received a formal communication from the Federation Council. Council leader Vexthara requested their presence at a special session the following day, where she would address the results of their strength assessments and discuss potential alternative roles for humanity within the Federation structure. The message was diplomatically worded, but its meaning was clear. Based on what they had witnessed, the Federation was already reconsidering humanity's suitability for full membership. Instead, they were being evaluated for auxiliary positions that would keep them safely away from any real responsibility or danger. Jake sat in his quarters that night, staring out at the stars and feeling the weight of his species' future pressing down on him. Every human dream of joining the galactic community, of standing as equals among the stars, seemed to be crumbling around him. They had traveled across the galaxy to prove themselves worthy, only to discover that by Federation standards, they were barely more capable than children. But somewhere deep in his mind, a small voice reminded him that humanity had faced impossible odds before and somehow found a way to survive. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Jake intended to face them with the same stubborn determination that had carried his species through every crisis in their long and difficult history. The third day began with what the Federation called a cultural exchange dinner, but Jake quickly realized it was something far more dangerous. The dining hall aboard the Nexus Prime was a magnificent space with tables that adjusted automatically to accommodate different species' needs. Crystalline formations provided seating for the Zephyrians, while energy fields supported the Luminari and specialized platforms held the insectoid. Kithara, the human delegation, sat at a standard table that felt almost comically small compared to the massive arrangements around them. Jake noticed that their placement put them at the center of the room, where every other species could observe them easily. It felt less like an honor and more like being put on display. Commander Zarkith dominated the evening from the moment he entered the hall. His crystal body had been polished to a mirror shine, and the battle scars etched into his surface seemed to glow with their own internal light. He moved through the room like a force of nature, greeting other delegates with the easy confidence of someone who had never known defeat. When the formal presentations began, Zarkith took center stage. "My fellow Federation members," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. "Tonight I wish to share some experiences from our recent military campaigns. Perhaps these stories will help our newest applicants understand the realities of galactic service." Jake felt his stomach tighten. This was not going to be a simple cultural exchange. Zarkith began with the conquest of Talvara Prime, a world where the gravity was 3 times stronger than Earth normal. He described how Zephyrian warriors had fought for 6 months in conditions that would crush most species within hours. The enemy had built their fortifications thinking that no invading force could operate effectively under such gravitational stress, he said, his eyes glittering with satisfaction. They were wrong. The alien warrior went on to describe battles fought in the vacuum of space, where Zephyrian soldiers used only personal energy shields and their own physical strength to board enemy vessels. He spoke of combat in environments where the temperature dropped to absolute zero, where acidic atmospheres would dissolve most forms of matter, and where radiation levels would kill unprotected beings in seconds. With each story, Jake noticed Zarkath's gaze drifting toward the human table. The message was becoming increasingly clear. This was not just storytelling, but a deliberate demonstration of the gap between human capabilities and the realities of Federation military service. On Zarian 7, Zarkath continued, our forces encountered defensive barriers made from compressed neutronium. Standard energy weapons were useless against such materials. Victory required our warriors to tear through the barriers using only their natural strength and determination. The audience listened with rapt attention, but Jake could see the sideways glances directed at his team. Kate was trying to maintain a diplomatic expression, but he could see the growing dismay in her eyes. Lisa had stopped eating entirely, her appetite destroyed by the obvious implications of these stories. Ryan was taking notes, perhaps trying to analyze the medical requirements for the scenarios being described. The evening's presentations moved beyond simple military campaigns to more subtle forms of psychological warfare. A Kithara delegate described the hive mind coordination required for their engineering projects, building structures on scales that dwarfed anything humanity had ever attempted. The delegate made several references to the limited cognitive capacity required for simpler tasks. Always with a polite nod toward the human table, a Luminari representative discussed energy, manipulation techniques that required consciousness to exist at frequencies humans could not even perceive, let alone access. The being's explanation was couched in academic language, but the underlying message was that certain levels of existence were simply beyond human reach. But it was Zarkath who delivered the killing blow. As the evening wound down and the formal presentations ended, he approached the human table with what might have been a friendly smile on anyone else. On his scarred crystal features it looked predatory. Commander Morrison, he said, his voice carrying just loud enough for nearby tables to overhear, I have been thinking about your species' potential contributions to our military efforts. These stories tonight have given me some ideas about how humans might best serve the Federation's needs. Jake braced himself for whatever was coming. We're always interested in hearing suggestions, Commander Zarkath. The alien warrior's smile widened. Well, clearly direct combat roles would be inappropriate given your physical limitations. The scenarios I described tonight would be fatal to your species within minutes. But there are always support roles that require less demanding capabilities. The pause before less demanding felt like a blade sliding between ribs. Jake could sense the attention of the entire dining hall focusing on their conversation. Perhaps logistics coordination, Zarkath continued, his tone becoming increasingly condescending. Managing supply lines from secure locations, well away from any actual danger. Or maybe communications relay, sitting safely in shielded bunkers, while stronger species handle the real fighting. The suggestion hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Around the dining hall, Jake could hear the subtle sounds of alien amusement, the clicking of Kithara mandibles, the harmonic resonance of pleased Luminari, and the crystal chimes that indicated Zephyrian satisfaction. After all, Zarkath added, apparently not content to leave any dignity intact, every military force needs someone to coordinate supplies from a safe distance. It's honest work, even if it's not particularly heroic. The laughter that followed was polite but unmistakable. Even species that had remained diplomatically neutral throughout the evening seemed to find humor in the suggestion. Jake felt the weight of every eye in the room, all of them looking at the humans with a mixture of pity and amusement. Kate's face had gone completely red, while Lisa stared down at her untouched plate with obvious shame. Ryan had stopped taking notes and was gripping his stylus so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. But it was Jake who felt the full impact of what had just happened. In one casual conversation, Zarkath had reduced humanity's entire military potential to that of frightened clerks hiding behind stronger protectors. That's a very thoughtful suggestion, Jake managed to say, his diplomatic training helping him maintain some semblance of composure. We'll certainly consider all possible ways that humanity can contribute to Federation security. His response was met with more polite laughter, as if the very idea of humans contributing to galactic security was inherently amusing. Zarkath nodded with apparent satisfaction and moved on to speak with other delegates. Leaving the human team sitting in uncomfortable silence, the rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced conversations and barely concealed condescension. Every interaction reinforced the same message. Humans were a curiosity at best, a liability at worst. When Council Leader Vexthara made her closing remarks, she spoke about the importance of finding appropriate roles for all Federation members, emphasizing how every species could contribute according to their natural abilities and limitations. As the human delegation returned to their quarters that night, none of them spoke about what had happened. The silence was heavy with shared humiliation and growing despair. They had come to the stars hoping to prove that humanity deserved a place among the galaxy's great civilizations, only to discover that they were seen as barely competent enough to handle support duties. Jake sat alone in his room afterward, staring at his reflection in the polished metal wall. Tomorrow would bring the fourth day of evaluation, and he wondered if there was any point in continuing. The galaxy had made its judgment clear: humanity was weak, limited, and suitable only for the most basic support roles. But as he rolled up his sleeves and looked down at the tattoo on his forearm, something stirred deep inside him. The simple image seemed to carry weight that had nothing to do with galactic politics or alien opinions. It was a reminder of something that no strength assessment or military story could measure, something that the Federation had not yet learned to recognize. The fourth day started with what seemed like routine medical procedures, something Jake had expected since their arrival. The Federation required biological scans of all potential member species, partly for health records and partly to understand their physical capabilities better. Dr. Ryan Brooks had prepared the team for this, explaining that it was standard practice and nothing to worry about. The medical bay aboard the Nexus Prime was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. Scanning devices floated freely through the air, operated by invisible energy fields that could examine every cell in a body without causing any discomfort. The lead medical officer was a luminary being named Veltar, whose energy form pulsed with calming blue and green colors throughout the examination process. Jake went through the initial scans without incident. The floating devices circled around him, creating holographic displays that showed his internal structure in amazing detail. Veltar made notes that appeared as glowing symbols in the air, occasionally making sounds that the translation system interpreted as satisfaction or mild curiosity. What Jake had not expected was the audience. Commander Zarkith had arrived during the medical examinations, claiming professional interest in human biology for tactical planning purposes. Several other alien delegates had joined him, apparently finding the process educational. Jake felt like a specimen being studied, but he endured it with the same patience he had shown throughout their stay. The routine examination became something else entirely when Veltar requested that Jake remove his uniform jacket for a more detailed scan of his torso and arms. This was standard procedure, Veltar explained, required for all species to ensure complete biological mapping. Jake complied without thinking much about it, unbuttoning his jacket and setting it aside. As he rolled up the sleeves of his undershirt, something changed in the room's atmosphere. Jake was focused on cooperating with the medical scan, but he noticed that the quiet conversations among the alien observers had suddenly stopped. When he looked up, he found Commander Zarkith staring at his exposed forearm with an expression that Jake had never seen on the alien warrior's face before. There, clearly visible on Jake's right forearm, was a tattoo that he had carried for so many years that he rarely thought about it anymore. The image was simple: a red poppy flower with a long stem, surrounded by text that read 1914 to 1918 and 1939 to 1945 at the top. Below the flower were more dates and names: Normandy, Guadalcanal, Chosin, Kisan, Fallujah, Kandahar. The silence in the medical bay stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Zarkith's crystal features had shifted into something that might have been confusion or possibly the beginning of understanding. The other alien observers had noticed his reaction and were now staring at Jake's arm as well, though they clearly had no idea what they were looking at. Dr. Brooks, who was monitoring the examination process, noticed the sudden attention focused on Jake's tattoo. Oh, that's just family military history, he said casually, as if explaining something completely ordinary. Jake's great-grandfather served in the First World War. His grandfather fought in the Pacific during World War II. His father was in Vietnam, and Jake himself did 3 tours in Afghanistan. The explanation seemed to make the silence even deeper. Veltar's energy form had stopped pulsing entirely, while Zarkith continued to stare at the tattoo as if it contained secrets that he was only beginning to comprehend. "Military history?" Zephyrian Commander asked, his voice carrying none of its usual confidence. "These dates and locations represent actual combat service?" Jake nodded, still not fully understanding why this was generating so much interest. "Yes, sir, it's a tradition in my family. We remember the places where our people served and the conflicts they survived. Every generation has added something to the record." As if to emphasize the point, Communications Officer Lisa Parker had finished her own examination and was putting her jacket back on. But as she did, her own sleeve rode up slightly, revealing a similar tattoo on her wrist. Hers showed different dates and locations: 1941 to 1945, 1950 to 1953, 1969, 1971, 2003 to 2011, with place names that included Stalingrad, Incheon, Saigon, Baghdad. The alien observers began exchanging glances that carried far more weight than anything Jake had seen during their previous interactions. Zarkith approached closer to examine the tattoos more carefully, his previous arrogance replaced by something that looked almost like caution. "Every human family has something like this?" he asked, directing the question to the entire human delegation. Kate nodded as she finished her own examination. "Most do. War has been a constant throughout human history. Every generation has faced some kind of conflict or crisis that threatened our survival. We remember because forgetting would dishonor those who didn't make it home." Ryan was the last to be examined, and when he removed his jacket, his tattoo was perhaps the most extensive of all. His forearm showed a continuous timeline stretching back further than the others: 1776, 1861 to 1865, 1914, 1918, 1939 to 1945, 1950, 1953, 1961 to 1975, 1991, 2001 to 2021, with dozens of location names and battle sites that represented over 2 centuries of human conflict. The medical bay had become completely silent, except for the quiet humming of the scanning devices. Veltar's energy form was pulsing with colors that the translation system couldn't interpret, while the other alien delegates stood frozen as if they were seeing something that challenged their fundamental understanding of the universe. Zarkith was the first to break the silence. "Commander Morrison, I need to understand something. Your species appears physically weak compared to Federation standards. Yet these markings suggest extensive combat experience across multiple generations. How do you reconcile this apparent contradiction?" Jake looked down at his tattoo, then back at the assembled aliens. For the first time since arriving at the Nexus Prime, he felt like he was being asked a question that mattered. "Commander Zarkith, I think there might be a misunderstanding about what makes a species strong in combat." The Zephyrian warrior's crystal body seemed to lean forward slightly. "Explain." "Physical strength is important," Jake said carefully. "But it's not the only factor that determines survival. Humans don't fight because we're the strongest beings in our conflicts. We fight because we have to. We fight because giving up means extinction." He gestured toward the tattoo on his arm. "Every date on here represents a time when my family's survival was threatened. Every location marks a place where someone in my bloodline faced impossible odds and somehow found a way to endure. We didn't win those battles because we were physically superior to our enemies. We won because we refused to quit." The implications of this statement seemed to ripple through the assembled aliens like a shock wave. Zarkith's scarred features showed the first signs of something that might have been respect, while the other observers began whispering among themselves in languages that the translation system struggled to process. Lisa stepped forward to add her own perspective. "Commander, your people see war as a test of strength. For humans, war is a test of will. The strongest army doesn't always win. The most stubborn one usually does. The medical examination had officially ended, but none of the aliens seemed ready to leave. They stood around the human delegation as if seeing them for the first time, studying the tattoos and trying to understand what they represented. The balance of power in the room had shifted in ways that none of them had expected when the day began. The fifth and final day began differently than any of the previous ones. Jake woke to find a formal invitation waiting in his quarters, not from the Federation Council as he had expected, but from Council Leader Vexthara herself requesting a private meeting. The message was brief but carried an urgency that had been absent from all their previous communications. Word of the tattoos had spread throughout the alien delegation during the night, and Jake could feel the change in atmosphere as soon as he stepped into the corridor. Aliens who had barely acknowledged the human presence before now watched them with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something that might have been concern. The casual dismissal that had characterized their first 4 days aboard the Nexus Prime had been replaced by attention that no one seemed quite ready to address directly. Jake made his way to Vexthara's private chambers, leaving his team behind, with instructions to prepare for whatever decision the Federation might reach about humanity's membership. The Council Leader's quarters were a marvel of crystal architecture, with walls that seemed to contain entire galaxies of swirling light. Vexthara herself stood at the center of the room, her massive form radiating an energy that felt different from their previous encounters. "Commander Morrison," she said as he entered, her voice carrying none of the subtle condescension that had marked their earlier meetings. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." The seating arrangement adjusted automatically to accommodate his smaller size, but for the first time since arriving, Jake didn't feel diminished by the difference in scale. Something fundamental had changed in how the Federation viewed his species, and he could sense it in every aspect of Vexthara's manner. "Council Leader," Jake began, but she raised one crystalline hand to stop him. "Before we proceed, I must ask you a direct question, and I need you to answer with complete honesty. The markings that you and your delegation bear, these tattoos, that represent your military history, are they common among your species?" Jake considered his response carefully. "Yes, Council Leader. Not everyone has tattoos specifically, but every human family has some way of remembering the conflicts they've survived. Some keep written records, others pass down stories, and many choose permanent markings like ours. War and survival are central to human culture because they've been central to human existence." Vexthara's form pulsed with colors that Jake had learned to associate with deep thought. "Commander Morrison, I need you to help me understand something that challenges everything we thought we knew about your species. You appear physically weak by Federation standards, yet these markings suggest that your people have been engaged in constant warfare for thousands of years. How is this possible?" The question hung in the air between them, and Jake realized that this was the moment everything would be decided. Not just humanity's membership in the Federation, but how they would be perceived by the galaxy for generations to come. "Council Leader," Jake said slowly, "I think the Federation has been measuring the wrong things. You've been testing our strength, but strength isn't what kept humanity alive. You've been evaluating our individual capabilities, but we've never survived as individuals." He rolled up his sleeve to expose the tattoo on his forearm. "Every date on here represents a time when my species faced extinction. Ice ages that lasted for millennia, plagues that killed half our population, wars that consumed entire continents, natural disasters that should have wiped us out completely." Vexthara leaned forward, her attention completely focused on his words. "We didn't survive those things because we were stronger than our enemies or our environment," Jake continued. "We survived because we refused to accept that survival was impossible. When facing an ice age, we didn't migrate to warmer climates, we learned to make fire and build shelters. When diseases threatened to destroy us, we didn't just accept our fate, we developed medicine and immunity. When enemies outnumbered us, we didn't surrender, we found ways to fight smarter instead of harder." The Council Leader's crystalline features shifted into patterns that Jake couldn't read, but her voice carried a new note of understanding. You're telling me that your species' primary adaptation is psychological rather than physical. Exactly, Jake said, feeling a surge of hope for the first time in days. Physical strength fails eventually. Technology becomes obsolete. Even intelligence has limits. But the refusal to give up, that's something that can be passed down through generations and applied to any challenge. Vexthara stood and moved to one of the chamber's windows, gazing out at the stars. Commander, I must confess that this revelation has caused considerable discussion among the Federation leadership. We have always assumed that military effectiveness required physical dominance. Your species suggests that we may have been wrong. She turned back to face him. Tell me about these conflicts represented on your markings. Help me understand how a physically weaker species could survive constant warfare. Jake thought about all the history lessons and family stories that had shaped his understanding of human nature. Council leader, humans don't fight fair. We can't afford to. When facing stronger enemies, we use tactics that others might consider dishonorable. We hide, we ambush, we use the environment against our opponents, we turn their strengths into weaknesses. He paused, then continued. But more than that, we fight for things that are more important than victory. We fight for our families, our homes, our right to exist. That kind of motivation doesn't end when you get tired or wounded. It ends when you're dead. Vexthara's form pulsed with what Jake was beginning to recognize as admiration. And this psychological adaptation, this refusal to surrender, it's universal among your species. Not universal, Jake admitted, but common enough that it's shaped our entire culture. We tell stories about heroes who faced impossible odds. We celebrate people who never gave up even when giving up would have been rational. We teach our children that persistence is more valuable than strength. The council leader returned to her position facing Jake. Commander Morrison, the Federation Council has reached a decision regarding your species' membership status. But first, I want to share with you some intelligence that may help you understand the significance of what you've revealed. She gestured, and holographic displays filled the chamber showing star maps and military reports. The Federation faces threats that pure strength cannot defeat. There are species in the Outer Rim that use tactics we cannot counter, enemies that exploit our reliance on individual superiority. We have been looking for allies who could help us adapt to these new challenges. Jake studied the displays, beginning to understand where this conversation was leading. Your species represents something we have never encountered before, Vexthara continued. A people who have turned weakness into strength, who have made survival itself into a weapon. The Federation Council unanimously agrees that humanity should be granted full membership, but not in the support role that Commander Zarkith suggested. She paused for effect. We want to offer humanity a position as the Federation's Endurance Corps specialists in impossible situations, where victory requires not strength but the absolute refusal to accept defeat. Jake felt a surge of emotion that he struggled to control. Council leader, humanity would be honored to serve in that capacity. There is one more thing, Vexthara added. Commander Zarkith has specifically requested that human officers be assigned to train Zephyrian forces in what he calls persistence tactics. It seems that even our greatest warriors recognize the value of learning how to never give up. As Jake prepared to leave the chamber, Vexthara's final words followed him. Commander Morrison, welcome to the Federation. The galaxy is about to learn what humanity has always known. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from refusing to admit that you're weak.